That day, the whole village left. They locked the houses, closed the windows, took the children and the dogs. By 2 in the afternoon, the roads stood empty. By 3, not a single car remained. Only one woman stayed behind. Within hours, she would learn why the locals fled every year, before nightfall on the last day of July. Because on that one night, the dead need only one thing: someone who is still alive. Her name was Theresa, just past 40, 10 years divorced, lonely, and bone-tired of the city. She used to live in New Orleans, on the top floor of an old building where summer turned the apartment into an oven and the air conditioner rattled uselessly, never quite keeping up. Outside her window was an endless racket: sirens, the rumble of passing trains, music leaking out of bars until dawn. The city never went quiet. Night after night, she lay awake in the dark, listening to noise that wasn't hers, and dreaming of silence. She wanted to run, to buy land, to grow real tomatoes, heavy and ripe and honest, far from the asphalt, far from people. 6 months ago, she found this house, a Creole cottage in a small village in Tammany Parish, its walls built of cypress, its foundation high, its front porch deep and shaded. Ancient oaks stood all around it, gray strands of Spanish moss trailing down from their branches, almost to the ground. The porch ceiling was painted a pale blue, a local tradition called haint blue. Evil spirits, they said, mistook the color for water and would never linger in a house beneath it. Theresa didn't believe in any of that. To her, it was just a pretty detail. And the house had sold cheap, suspiciously cheap. The previous owner had been an elderly Cajun woman in a hurry to sell. She barely haggled and even threw in all the furniture with the house. When Theresa came to collect the keys, there was a strange pause. The old woman studied her carefully, then asked quietly, "Have you heard of the Dead Man's Crossing?" "No," Theresa said, smiling. "I don't believe in local ghost stories." The old woman pressed the keys into her palm, her fingers ice cold against Theresa's skin. "Then I'm sorry for you," she said, and shook her head and walked away without another word. Theresa only shrugged and told herself it was nothing, just an old woman's strange manner. Now she sat on that same porch with a mug of tea, looking out over her garden. 4 rows of tomatoes neatly tied to their stakes, 3 rows of okra, 2 rows of cayenne pepper, all of it weeded, watered, and cared for. She kept meticulous records, logging the number of plants, the fruit count, the projected yield in pounds. She liked that kind of order. I did this, she thought. Heat pressed in all around, cicadas droning deafeningly in the grass, the Spanish moss hanging motionless. There was no wind at all. Somewhere beyond the trees ran the dark water of the Bogue Falaya, a river Theresa never visited. Locals said it was full of alligators and venomous snakes, its bottom muddy and treacherous. To her, it was just something beyond the trees, easy enough to ignore. Or so she thought. Then, on the very first day, Theresa met Miss May on the 3rd day. She was watering the garden when a voice called out from the gate. "Morning, neighbor." A heavy-set woman in her 60s stood at the fence, wearing an apron with a big front pocket, already holding out her phone. "Write down my number," she said, "just in case." Theresa wrote it down. She'd noticed, since moving in, that the village had no signal at all, not in the house, not anywhere on the land. But Miss May let her in on the secret. Right by the road, next to the mailbox, a bar of signal magically appeared. A few days later, Theresa saw her neighbor at that same spot again, Miss May standing by the mailbox post, shouting into her phone, "Cole, bring home a new coffee maker! Mine burned out!" She finished the call, tucked the phone away, and turned, asking cheerfully if Theresa needed help with anything. "No, thank you," Theresa said. Miss May just nodded, no offense taken, and went back to her own porch. At the end of July, Theresa drove to the local store, an old rural general store, the only place to shop for miles around. Inside, it smelled of hay, dried corn, cheap coffee, and fertilizer. The old wooden floorboards creaked under every step. Behind the counter sat an elderly clerk in a worn baseball cap, his face dark and deeply lined from the sun. In the corner, near an old soda cooler, 2 women in straw hats stood whispering to each other. Theresa noticed them right away, but the moment she got closer, they fell silent. Theresa set her purchases on the counter: a can of cola, a loaf of bread, a big bag of tomato fertilizer. The old man picked up the scanner and started ringing her up, slow and unhurried, until halfway through, his hand went still. "You're the one who just moved in around here?" he asked in a low, hoarse voice. "Yes," Theresa said. He raised his head and looked at her from under the brim of his cap. His eyes faded, almost gray. Slowly, he set the scanner back down on the counter, the sale still unfinished, no longer looking at her groceries, only at her, tense, as if he were seeing a ghost. "Then leave today," he said quietly. "What?" Theresa frowned. "Don't stay out there alone," he said. "August 1st is coming. You need to leave before then." Theresa hesitated for a second, then gathered her things anyway. "Thanks for the advice," she said, "but I've got a lot of work to do in that garden. I'm not going anywhere." The old man said nothing. He just kept staring at her, unblinking, his gaze heavy. In the corner, the 2 women in straw hats slowly exchanged a glance, and one of them quietly crossed herself. Theresa paid quickly in cash and stepped back out into a street where the heat now felt suffocating. She got into the car, set the bag on the passenger seat, and cranked the air conditioner to full blast, cold air hitting her face. "Small town stories," she said out loud, "just scaring off newcomers." She put the car in gear and pulled onto the empty highway, trying hard not to think about it anymore. On the evening of July 30th, Theresa was watering the garden when car doors slammed loudly across the road. The neighbors in the house opposite were hurriedly loading bags into a big SUV, the husband throwing luggage into the trunk, the kids already buckled into the back seat, a dog whimpering in its owner's arms. Where is everyone going? Theresa wondered. But she didn't ask. She just turned back and watered the next row of tomatoes. The morning of July 31st, she woke to the roar of engines. She dressed quickly and hurried out onto the porch. Cars streamed down the broken road, one after another. Neighbors carried duffel bags out of their houses. Someone frantically shut windows from inside. Down the street, an unlocked door banged in the wind, over and over. Panic hung thick in the air. Theresa couldn't stand it anymore. She went down off the porch and walked through the village. At the house across the road, the front door stood wide open. A forgotten grocery bag sat on the wooden step, a loaf of bread and a few cans spilling out of it. She stopped at the threshold and looked inside. Empty. The hallway light was still burning bright. The next house was open too, and empty. Another house. Empty. Gates flung wide. A chill ran down Theresa's spine. People had left in such a hurry, they hadn't even thought about locking up. They'd simply dropped everything and run. She went back inside. The house had gone quiet. No more sound drifted in from the street outside. No footsteps, no voices, no radio playing anywhere. Theresa went to Miss May's fence. Packing was in full swing over there. Cole, Miss May's husband, was frantically throwing bags into the bed of his pickup, while Miss May herself bustled anxiously around the porch. Spotting Theresa, she shouted across for her to pack up and come with them right now. But Theresa refused, stubborn. She said simply that she couldn't abandon her garden and her harvest. At that, Miss May went still. Her face turned pale and tight. Quietly, she said Theresa simply didn't understand, and then added the worst part. Tonight, no one in this village would be left alive. No one at all. Just then, Cole leaned on the horn. Miss May flinched and ran for the truck, which peeled off the moment she was in. Through the open window, on the move, she screamed one last warning. begging Theresa not to stay the night. The truck disappeared. The engine noise quickly faded. By 2 in the afternoon, the village was completely dead. Theresa walked out onto the road. No sound anywhere. No birds, no cicadas in the grass, no dogs barking. The wind had stopped entirely, and the gray Spanish moss hung utterly still on the oaks. Theresa hurried back inside. Her hands were visibly shaking as she poured herself a glass of water from the tap. Inside, Theresa felt completely unmoored. The walls seemed to press in on her. She couldn't bear it. She grabbed her keys and went back outside, holding on to a small, timid hope that she might still find someone left in the village. At the gatehouse by the exit road, she spotted an old rusted Ford, a man moving around beside it. She recognized him, Silas, the local forester. Relief flooded through her. At last, one sane person remained in this place. Not everyone had lost their minds. She wasn't alone here after all. But as she got closer, that hope collapsed. The forester was locking up the gatehouse. He was leaving too. Silas turned, genuinely startled to see her, and asked how she'd even ended up here. He'd been sure he was the last one left. He started urging her to hurry, insisting she drop everything and come with him right now. There was no time left. Sunset was close. Confused, Theresa asked him directly what everyone was so afraid of. What kind of madness was happening in this village? The old man sighed heavily and told her the whole truth. Long ago, right on this spot, there had been a ford across the river. The road to the old cemetery ran straight through the water, and the dead were carried along it. One year, on July 31st, a funeral procession made that crossing, burying an old man, a local healer, who'd practiced black hoodoo his whole life. To save time, the procession decided to cross straight through the ford. Right as the procession reached the middle of the crossing, a powerful surge of water came out of nowhere. There'd been no rain, no storm either. The water simply appeared out of nothing. The current swept away the horses, the wagon, the coffin, and every last person in an instant. The bodies were never found. Neither was the coffin. Ever since, every year on that same night, they search for the crossing. Silas added one more horrifying detail. The dead on that crossing need a living eye. Without a living person, they are completely blind. They cannot see the road at all. That's why they hunt for whoever is left in the village. 15 years ago, a family from Baton Rouge bought a house here. A husband, a wife, and 2 children. They didn't believe the local legends and stayed the night. On the morning of August 1st, the house stood empty. All 4 were later found in the river. The official story blamed the parents. Drunk, taking a boat out at night, the whole family drowning when it capsized. But Silas said grimly that this was an outright lie from the sheriff's office. That Fanny had been deeply decent, deeply Christian people who never touched alcohol, and they would never, under any circumstances, have gone boating on the river in the dead of night. The forester fell silent for a moment. He looked hard at Theresa from under his brows and said that if she was truly set on staying, she'd have to follow 3 strict rules. First, lock the door tight and open it for no one. Second, never, under any circumstances, listen to their voices. Third, do not look out the windows at all. They need a living gaze. She must never give it to them. Silas finished speaking, climbed into his truck, and drove off. Back home, his words wouldn't leave Theresa's head, so she decided to check his story for herself. She opened her laptop and, with real effort, caught a faint signal, then typed the name of the village and the river into the search bar. The connection barely held, and an old news site loaded, agonizingly slow. But at last the text appeared, in large type. 4 found drowned in Bogfalaya River. Below it was a family photo. Husband, wife, 2 children, a boy and a girl, all of them smiling. Theresa started to read. The circumstances were strange. According to the police, the father and mother had both been heavily drunk, had taken a boat out at night, the boat had capsized, and the whole family had drowned. But the article reeked of something false. The boat itself was never found. No proper investigation had ever been done. At the very end, It noted the case had been closed by local police. Official reason? Lack of evidence. Too much time passed. The authorities had clearly wanted the story buried, and fast. Theresa closed the laptop. The screen went dark. It all lined up. Old Silas hadn't lied. That family really had died here, exactly 15 years ago, and the police really had just closed the case for lack of evidence. Panic finally swallowed her whole. She understood now that she needed to leave immediately. Toward evening, she gave in. "I'll leave for just one night," she told herself. "I'll come back tomorrow." She threw her keys, wallet, and phone into a bag, locked up the house, and got into the car. The engine started. She pulled out of the yard, turned onto the road, and picked up speed. But 50 yards on, the engine coughed, then died, the dashboard flickering once before going dark. She hit the brakes, and the car rolled to a stop in the middle of the empty road. She turned the key. Nothing. Turned it again. Silence. She popped the hood, and the heat hit her in the face. Battery, radiator, wires, none of it meaning anything to her. She wasn't a mechanic, and panic was already rising in her chest. The mailbox, she thought. There's signal there. She ran, found a single bar on her phone, and dialed for a tow. A ring. Static. A long silence. Finally, a dispatcher picked up, his voice slow and half asleep. He calmly explained that tonight was the eve of August, and the whole parish was under a storm warning. Every truck they had was already out. Flatly, he told her nobody was driving out to the middle of nowhere at night, not tonight, and suggested she just wait until morning. "I'm alone out here," she said. "My car won't start." But the dispatcher only repeated that the first available truck couldn't reach her until the morning of August 1st. She'd be their very first call of the day. Then the call cut out. 0 bars on the screen. Theresa shouted into the dead phone, but the signal was simply gone. "Hello? Hello?" Nothing answered but silence. Theresa lowered the phone and looked down the road. 15 miles of forest stood between her and the highway. Alligators in those woods, snakes, and darkness coming on fast. Slowly, she walked back to the house, went inside, and locked the door behind her. She checked every window, every latch, walked the rooms, then returned to the kitchen and sank into a chair. She looked at the clock. Only a few hours remained until nightfall. The heat broke suddenly, without warning. One moment it was stifling, the next, cold. Real cold, not just a chill. Theresa got up, pulled out a blanket, and wrapped herself in it. Beyond the trees, a pale haze came creeping in, low, almost pressed flat to the ground, spreading over the grass, crawling toward the foundation of the house. Around 11, she heard splashing right outside, on the porch, quiet, like someone wading through shallow water. She crept to the window and eased the curtain back an inch. Her garden was under water, a good 8 inches of it. Black, oily, dead still. The tomato plants stuck up out of it like tiny islands. The smell hit her at once. Silt, mud, rotten leaves, wet wood. Then came heavy footsteps on the porch steps, every board groaning under the weight. A knock, loud, insistent, steady. A man's voice. "Hey, lady, open up!" A pause. "We're soaked through out here. It's coming down in sheets." Theresa didn't answer. She backed away from the door. She knew she shouldn't look. Silas had been clear about that. But her hand found the edge of the curtain on its own, and she looked. Standing in her garden were people, many of them. Old, soaked clothes, with water running off the sleeves, hair plastered flat to their skulls, skin white as a fish's belly. 4 men carried a coffin on their shoulders, dark wood with iron fittings at each corner. Beyond the gate, there was no road anymore. There was only black water, stretching all the way to the horizon. Every one of them turned their face toward her at once, their eyes white, no pupils, no iris at all, blind, and yet somehow looking straight at her. Voices came from every direction. "Show us the way, sister. We've lost the path. We need a guide. Without the living, we can't see. The coffin is heavy. Help us." Ordinary voices, tired, pleading, human. Theresa pressed her back against the wall, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself over and over, "Don't look, don't look, don't look." The voices faded, and silence held for a long minute while Theresa waited. Then 2 children appeared at the window, a boy and a girl, maybe 7 or 8. Their pajamas were soaked and clinging to their skin, their faces pale but completely ordinary, completely normal, lashes and noses and all, only water running endlessly off their clothes. They spoke together, in perfect unison, in identical voices. "Please, ma'am, we're so cold. Our mom and dad went under the water, but we got out. Please let us in. We're scared. The forest is so dark. Just for one night." Theresa didn't move, but her hand did, drifting toward the door on its own. Instinct. Children, cold and wet, asking for help. Her fingers found the latch, and then she remembered. The family that had bought a house here 15 years ago. A husband, a wife, 2 children, a boy and a girl. All of them drowned. She snatched her hand back. The children at the window went still. Their faces changed, slowly, like a mask being slid aside. The voice that came next wasn't a child's anymore. It was low, adult, rough. "Come out on your own, or the river will drag you down." They began beating their heads against the glass, dull and even. Once, again, again. Water started seeping in under the door. The water poured into the house fast, a thin trickle under the threshold turning into a stream within seconds. Theresa grabbed towels and threw herself at the door, stuffing them into the gaps, but they soaked through instantly as water spread across the tile floor and the rugs floated up. Her thoughts scrambled. They wanted to drive her outside, she realized. Not drown her, drive her out. Force her to open the door and walk straight to them. They need a living gaze, she thought. If they can't see her, they can't find her. She scanned the kitchen. No attic, no second floor, just an old table and a kitchen chair, and set the chair on top of the table, climbing up to reach the medicine cabinet on the shelf, where she found cotton balls and grabbed a kitchen towel. Back on the chair, she tied the towel around her head, squeezed her eyes shut, and packed the cotton into her ears. Darkness. Almost silence. Through the cotton came only a dull, muffled hum, underwater and unintelligible. She pulled her knees to her chest and didn't move, while the water kept rising and cold crept up from below, her legs going numb, first her toes, then her feet. At some point, something cold and slick brushed against her ankle. She didn't flinch, and after a moment, the touch disappeared. Time passed. Without eyes, without ears, just darkness and the press of cotton. Her back ached, the blindfold damp, from tears probably, though she hadn't even noticed when that had started. She waited. She held on. She felt the birds before she heard them. A vibration simply lifted and the air changed. Slowly, Theresa pulled the cotton from her ears. Thrushes singing in the oaks, a woodpecker somewhere far off. The cicadas not yet started, but the air alive again. She untied the blindfold. Gray morning light. A layer of brown silt covered the floor, and a dark stain ran along the walls, well above waist height. If she'd stood on that floor all night, the water would have gone clean over her head. Theresa climbed down from the chair, then the table, and stood on the wet floor. Her legs wouldn't hold her. so she braced a hand against the wall and waited a moment before opening the door and stepping out onto the porch, the blue ceiling stretching overhead. Her garden was a ruin of mud. The tomato plants flattened, the fruit washed out, the okra beaten down, the cayenne peppers scattered flat on the ground. The big fertilizer barrel lay tipped on its side, and water still stood ankle-deep in the low part of the garden, where her gardening gloves floated lifeless in the muddy puddles between the beds.
6 months of work, gone for nothing. Theresa looked at it all and felt nothing, only the ache in her back and the numbness still in her legs as she came down off the porch and walked out onto a road that was completely dry. Dry dust, dry pebbles, pine needles underfoot. On Miss May's porch sat a dry rocking chair, a day-old newspaper lying dry on the railing. Beyond her fence, there wasn't a trace of water anywhere, not one puddle. The water had come only for her. Theresa stood in the middle of the road, while beyond the trees, the dark water of the Bogue Falaya went on flowing, quiet, the same as always. They had been searching for the living, and in the whole village, there had been exactly one living person, her, and she never let them see her.
If the nature around you suddenly falls silent, that isn't quiet. When heat turns to cold for no reason at all, that isn't weather. If fog crawls out of the forest and water rises around your feet, don't open the door. Don't look through the window. Don't listen to the voices on the other side of the glass, especially not the children's. There are places where the dead never leave. They don't rest. They wait for their hour, out in the dark water, on a crossing that no one has walked in 100 years. And there's only one thing they need: a living gaze, living ears, a living hand on the lock of the door. Don't ever give it to them.